Hannah thought she was traveling across the country to marry a prosperous farmer. She had no idea she was walking into a trap. She believed the letters from Ezra Montgomery, the ones describing a sprawling homestead in Montana, an orchard bearing fruit, a future built on honest work. She believed the good reverend in her small Connecticut town who said this was her only chance. But the letters were lies. The homestead was a fiction, and her only chance was about to become her last mistake. Because Ezra Montgomery wasn't a farmer, he was a predator. And Hannah Wilson, the quiet librarian nobody ever noticed, was his next victim. She was supposed to arrive, be stripped of her savings, and disappear, just like the others. But they all made one critical miscalculation. They underestimated the quiet ones. This is the story of how a woman who was too shy to speak up for herself found herself in a fight for her life, how she uncovered a conspiracy that ran deeper than any silver mine, and how she learned that in the unforgiving wilderness, the most dangerous thing you can do is mistake silence for weakness. If you're ready for a story that will keep you guessing until the very last second, you've come to the right place. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's get into it. The train ride west was a blur of rumbling steel and shifting landscapes. For a woman who had never been more than 20 miles from her hometown of Millbrook, Connecticut, the sheer scale of America was staggering. Hannah kept to herself, a small, quiet figure in a plain gray dress, her nose buried in a book of poetry. She was an island of stillness in a sea of restless travelers, each one chasing a dream or running from a nightmare. She noticed things, though. She always did. She saw the nervous tick in the land speculator's eye as he promised fortunes in Nebraska soil. She saw the desperation in the young mother's face as she tried to quiet a crying baby with a thin, watered-down bottle of milk. And she saw the way a group of rough-looking men in the corner of the dining car watched the single women traveling alone. Their eyes weren't kind. They were calculating. One evening, as she was returning to her berth, she had to squeeze past their table. The air was thick with the smell of cheap whiskey and cigar smoke. "Look at that one of them rasped, his voice low but caring. "Another mail-order mouse heading for the trap." His companion chuckled, a wet, unpleasant sound. "Montgomery's got a taste for the quiet ones, don't he? Thinks they don't scream so loud." The name hit Hannah like a physical blow. Montgomery. She froze for a split second, her hand gripping the back of a seat for support. Had she heard correctly? It had to be a coincidence. Montgomery was a common name, but the way they said it, the knowing smirk, the mention of the trap. A cold dread began to seep into her bones. She hurried past, her heart hammering against her ribs, pretending she hadn't heard. But the words were seared into her mind. Mail-order mouse heading for the trap. The rest of the journey was torture. Every friendly smile from a stranger seemed like a mask. Every bump and sway of the train felt like it was carrying her closer to an unseen doom. She reread Ezra's letters, searching for a hint of deception in his neat, confident handwriting. But there was nothing. He wrote of hard work, of building a community, of needing a partner with a gentle character and a literate mind. He sounded decent. He sounded safe. But the whiskey-soaked words of the men on the train echoed louder than any written promise. When the train finally pulled into Helena, the territorial capital, Hannah felt a wave of nausea. This was it, the end of the line. According to Ezra's last telegram, he would meet her the following morning. She was to spend the night at the station hotel. As she stepped onto the bustling platform, scanning the crowd for a face she'd only seen in a small, faded photograph, a woman approached her. She was older, with steel gray hair pinned in a severe bun, and a dress so plain it was almost a uniform. Her smile, however, was warm, or at least it was meant to look warm. "Miss Hannah Wilson?" the woman asked, her voice brisk. "I'm Martha Blackwood, from Pine Creek. I believe you're expected by Ezra Montgomery." Hannah nodded, clutching her small valise. "Yes, he said he would meet me tomorrow." "Ah, yes, there's been a slight change of plans," Martha said smoothly, her smile never wavering. "A business matter, you understand. Ezra was called away unexpectedly. He was terribly upset to miss your arrival, but he sent my husband and me to collect you. You'll stay with us in Pine Creek until he returns. It's all arranged." Relief warred with a nagging suspicion. It seemed plausible. Business was unpredictable on the frontier, but it was also convenient. Terribly convenient. He didn't mention any urgent business, Hannah said, her voice softer than she intended. Martha's smile tightened just a fraction. It came up suddenly. A land auction in Butte he simply couldn't miss. He's expanding the orchard, you see. Always thinking ahead. That Ezra. She gestured towards a sturdy wagon where a gray-haired man sat waiting. That's my husband, Samuel. Come, dear. We must be on our way if we want to reach Pine Creek before dark. Hannah hesitated for a moment. Her instincts, honed by a lifetime of quiet observation, were screaming that something was wrong. But what choice did she have? She was thousands of miles from home, with barely enough money to last a week, let alone book passage back east. To refuse their help would be to strand herself completely. With a deep breath, she allowed Martha to guide her to the wagon. Samuel Blackwood tipped his hat, his eyes kind and his smile gentle. He seemed like a good man. They both did. They seemed like exactly the sort of decent, church-going folk Ezra had described in his letters. And that's what scared her the most. The journey to Pine Creek was a long, rattling affair over a trail that was little more than 2 deep ruts in the prairie grass. Martha kept up a steady stream of chatter, pointing out landmarks and talking about the virtues of Pine Creek and its most distinguished resident, Ezra Montgomery. A true pillar of the community, she said, patting Hannah's hand. So generous. He practically funded the new schoolhouse himself, and his farm is the most prosperous in the valley. You're a very lucky woman, my dear. Hannah just nodded, offering small non-committal sounds. She was watching, listening. She noticed the way Martha and Samuel exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance when she mentioned Ezra's land auction. She noticed that for a man supposedly rushing to an auction, Ezra had left no specific instructions, no letter for her, only a verbal message delivered by strangers. It was all too neat and too vague. When they finally crested a hill and Pine Creek came into view, it was smaller and rougher than she had imagined. A single dusty street lined with a dozen or so wooden buildings. A general store, a blacksmith, a saloon, and a handful of houses. It didn't look like a town on the verge of prosperity. It looked like a town clinging to survival. The Blackwoods' home was at the edge of town, a neat log house with a tidy garden. Inside it was clean and sparsely furnished. Martha showed Hannah to a small guest room upstairs. You rest now, Martha said, her smile firmly in place. Supper is at 6. I'm sure you'll feel much better after a hot meal and a good night's sleep. Left alone, Hannah didn't rest. She stood at the small window, looking out at the town. People moved with a slow, deliberate pace, but their eyes were quick. As they glanced towards the Blackwood house, their expressions were a mixture of curiosity and something else. Something she couldn't quite name. Was it pity? Her mind raced. The men on the train. The sudden change of plans. The Blackwoods' overly perfect story. It was all a puzzle, and she was missing the most important pieces. She felt trapped, a pawn in a game she didn't understand. Her agreement had been with Ezra Montgomery. Until she saw him, spoke with him, she was a guest in this house. Or was she a prisoner? She opened her trunk, the one containing her most precious belongings. Tucked beneath her mother's Bible was a small leather pouch. Inside was her savings. Not much by Eastern standards, but a small fortune out here. It was the money Ezra was expecting her to bring. The money he had called her dowry. A thought, cold and sharp, pierced through her fear. If this was a trap, then the money was the bait. And if they knew she had to hide it, now. But where? The room was small, with few hiding places. Under the mattress? Too obvious. In the wardrobe? The first place they'd look. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on the simple wooden bed frame. Using the small knife from her sewing kit, she pried at the floorboard beneath the bed. It was old wood, and it groaned in protest, but after a few minutes, she managed to lift a corner. The space beneath was dark and dusty, filled with cobwebs. It was perfect. She wrapped the leather pouch in a spare piece of linen and pushed it deep into the crawl space, then carefully replaced the board. She smoothed the rug back over it just as she heard footsteps on the stairs. It was Martha. Hannah, dear, she called through the door. Are you decent? I brought you some fresh water. Hannah's heart pounded. She quickly sat on the bed, smoothing her dress. Come in, she called, her voice surprisingly steady. Martha entered, carrying a pitcher and basin. Her eyes did a quick, sweeping survey of the room. Hannah felt certain the older woman was looking for something, checking to see if the trunk had been unpacked, checking to see if anything of value was visible. There you are, Martha said, her smile as bright as ever. I do hope you'll be comfortable here. We want you to think of this as your home. For now. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. For now. That night at supper, Samuel spoke at length about Ezra's many ventures. He's not just a farmer, you know, he said, carving a piece of tough roast beef. He has interests in a silver mine up in the mountains. A very clever man, always looking for the next opportunity. A silver mine? Hannah asked, keeping her tone light. He never mentioned that in his letters. He only wrote of the farm. Again, that flicker of a glance between husband and wife. Oh, it's a recent investment, Martha said quickly. He's a modest man, doesn't like to boast, but it's going to make him a very wealthy one. And you by extension, my dear. They were laying it on thick, too thick. The prosperous farmer, the generous benefactor, the savvy investor. They were building a myth, and she was supposed to just smile and accept it. But every word they spoke felt like another bar, locking her into a cage. After supper, she excused herself, claiming fatigue from the journey. Back in her room, she didn't sleep. She sat in the dark, listening to the sounds of the house, the low murmur of the Blackwoods' conversation downstairs, the creak of the floorboards as they eventually retired for the night, the howl of a distant coyote. This wasn't right. None of it. Ezra wasn't at a land auction. He wasn't delayed by business. He was gone. And the Blackwoods knew why. But why bring her here? Why go through this elaborate charade? Unless they weren't working for Ezra. Unless they had their own agenda. What if they had intercepted his letters, lured her here themselves, planning to take her money and dispose of her, blaming it on the harsh frontier? It was a terrifying thought, but it made a grim kind of sense. They had her isolated, under their control. No one in Millbrook would know what happened to her for months. By then it would be too late. Her only hope was to play along, to be the quiet, compliant, trusting woman they expected her to be. She had to learn the truth about what was happening in Pine Creek, and she had to find a way out. The next morning she came downstairs with a placid smile on her face. I was thinking, she said to Martha, since I have some time on my hands while I wait for Ezra, perhaps I could be useful? I have some experience as a librarian. I noticed the town doesn't have one. Martha looked surprised, then pleased. Why, what a wonderful idea. Patrick Donovan at the general store has a whole crate of books someone donated. He's been saying for months he needs someone to organize them. It was the perfect excuse. The general store was the center of town. It was where people talked, where news was shared, where she might overhear something. It was her one chance to break out of the Blackwoods' suffocating hospitality and learn the town's secrets. I'd be happy to help, Hannah said, her voice soft and unassuming. Martha beamed. Excellent. I'll walk you over myself after breakfast. The townspeople will be so impressed. Ezra's intended, already contributing to the community. Hannah just smiled. They thought she was a mouse walking into their trap. They had no idea she was about to start searching for the door. Donovan's Mercantile was the heart of Pine Creek, a cavernous room that smelled of coffee beans, leather, and sawdust. It was a place of commerce, but more importantly, it was a place of information. Ranchers, miners, and townsfolk all passed through its doors, and whispers traveled faster than a stagecoach. Patrick Donovan was a barrel-chested man with a booming laugh and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. When Martha introduced Hannah as Ezra Montgomery's fiancée, his smile was welcoming, but Hannah caught a flicker of something in his eyes. It was that same look she'd seen on the faces of the other townsfolk. Pity. A librarian, you say? He boomed. Well, that's a godsend. I've got 3 crates of books in the back that have been gathering dust for a year. Help yourself. He led her to a cluttered storeroom. In the corner, just as he'd said, were 3 large wooden crates. It was a daunting task, but for Hannah it was a sanctuary. Books didn't lie. They didn't have hidden motives. Surrounded by them, she felt a sliver of her old self return. She spent the day sorting through the donations. Shakespeare, the Bible, farming almanacs, and cheap, thrilling novels. As she worked, she kept her ears open. People came and went from the main store, their voices drifting back to her. She learned who was feuding with whom, whose cattle were sick, and who had the best price on flour. But whenever the name Montgomery was mentioned, voices dropped to a hushed murmur. She heard snippets. Took every last cent. Promised her the world, just like the one before. Sheriff won't do a thing, says it's a civil matter. The pieces were starting to connect, just like the one before. So there had been other women. What happened to them? Where did they go? The friendly, prosperous town Martha described was a facade. Pine Creek had a dark underbelly, and Ezra Montgomery was at the center of it. That evening, as she was packing up, Donovan approached her. "You're making quick work of this," he said, leaning against a stack of barrels. "I enjoy the work," she replied quietly. He looked at her, his expression serious. "You know," he said, lowering his voice, "this town, it can be a hard place for newcomers, especially for a woman alone. Was this a warning or a test?" "Mrs. Blackwood has been very kind," Hannah said, choosing her words carefully. Donovan grunted. "The Blackwoods are pillars of the community," he said, the slight hesitation telling her everything. "They look out for Ezra's interests. Make sure you look out for your own." It was the closest thing to an offer of help she had received. Before she could respond, the bell on the front door jingled, and Samuel Blackwood entered the store. His smile was as pleasant as ever, but his eyes were sharp as he looked from Donovan to Hannah. "There you are, my dear," he said. "Martha was getting worried. Ready to come home?" The word home sounded like a threat. She was an unpaid librarian by day, a prisoner by night. As she walked back to the house with Samuel, she felt the trap closing in tighter. The Blackwoods weren't just Ezra's friends. They were his keepers, his minders. They were part of the scam. The next day, Hannah made a discovery. Tucked inside an old copy of Moby Dick was a folded piece of paper. It was a deed. A quitclaim deed, to be precise. It was dated 6 months prior and signed by a woman named Eleanor Vance. It transferred the ownership of a 160-acre plot of land, described in detail, to Ezra Montgomery. The price listed on the deed? $1. Eleanor Vance, the one before. Hannah's blood ran cold. This woman had been tricked into signing away her land, her property, for nothing. Where was she now? Hannah slipped the deed into her pocket. It was evidence. It was dangerous. But it was the first real proof she had. She needed to find out where that land was. Later that day, while sorting through a box of old territorial maps and records, she found it. The plot of land described in the deed was about 5 miles north of town. According to the map, it had a small cabin and a well. It was isolated, the perfect place to make someone disappear. The next piece of the puzzle came in a telegram. Samuel Blackwood came to the store to collect it, his face grim. He read it, then looked over at Hannah with a practiced expression of sympathy. "I'm afraid I have some bad news, my dear," he said, loud enough for everyone in the store to hear. "It's from Ezra. There's been a financial reversal. The silver mine, it seems it was a bust. He's lost everything." He shook his head sadly. "The poor man is devastated. He says he can't, in good conscience, ask you to marry him now that he's a pauper. He releases you from your engagement." It was a performance, and the whole store was his audience. He was publicly cutting her loose, setting the stage for her departure. Now when she vanished, the story would be simple. The mail-order bride, upon hearing her fiancé was broke, simply packed her bags and left. No one would ask any questions. But Hannah knew better. This wasn't about releasing her. It was about isolating her completely. Now she had no official connection to anyone in town. She was just a lone woman with, they assumed, a pouch full of cash. And they were getting ready to collect. She looked at the telegram in Samuel's hand. He was about to fold it, but she held out her hand. "May I?" she asked softly. "It is addressed to me, in a way." Surprised, he handed it to her. The message was brief, just as he'd said. "Mine failed. Total loss. Cannot hold you to promise. Godspeed." E.M. But Hannah, a woman who had spent her life among words, noticed something strange. The telegraph operator had used a period after every word. Mine, failed, total, loss. It was inefficient, costly, and not standard practice. Unless it wasn't punctuation, unless it was a code. Back in the storeroom, her heart pounding, she stared at the message. What if it wasn't about the words, but the spaces between them? She started counting the letters. Mine, 4. Failed, 6. Total, 5. Loss, 4. It didn't seem to mean anything. Then she remembered something from a book she'd read on cryptography. A simple book cipher. It required a key, a text that both the sender and receiver knew. What text would she and Ezra both know? His letters. She pulled them from her pocket. She had kept them all. She tried the first letter. Using the numbers from the telegram, 4654, she looked for the corresponding words in his letter. The fourth word of the first letter was danger. The sixth word was Blackwoods. The fifth was not. The fourth was friends. Danger. Blackwoods not friends. She tried it again with the next line of the telegram. Cannot, hold, you, 2, promise. The numbers were 6, 4, 3, 2, 7. She went to the second letter Ezra had sent her. The sixth word was they. The fourth was will. The third was take. The second was your. The seventh was money. They will take your money. It was a warning, a desperate message from a man caught in his own trap. Ezra wasn't the mastermind. He was a pawn, just like her. The Blackwoods were running the show, and they had decided it was time to cash out. Just then, the front bell of the store jingled violently. The door flew open, and a man stood silhouetted against the harsh afternoon sun. He was tall and broad, dressed in worn canvas and leather, his face obscured by a thick beard in the shadow of his hat. He radiated an aura of raw, coiled power. "Where are they?" he roared, his voice like rocks grinding together. "Where are the Blackwoods?" Patrick Donovan stepped out from behind the counter. "Now hold on, Caleb. What's the trouble?" The man, Caleb, strode into the store. His eyes, a startlingly clear blue, swept the room and locked onto Hannah. "I just came from Butte," he said, his voice shaking with fury. "The Silver Summit mine didn't fail. It collapsed, buried 3 men alive. And it wasn't an accident." He took another step, his gaze fixed on Hannah. "The owner, Ezra Montgomery, has been arrested. For criminal negligence. For murder." The store fell silent. Everyone stared at Hannah, the fiancée of a killer. But Hannah wasn't looking at them. She was looking at Caleb, and in his furious blue eyes she saw the first glimmer of something she hadn't had since she left Connecticut. A chance. A storm of chaos erupted in the store. The news of Ezra's arrest for murder hit Pine Creek like a lightning strike. People started shouting questions, their feigned sympathy for Hannah curdling into morbid curiosity. Through it all, Caleb Thornton stood like a rock in a raging river, his gaze never leaving Hannah. Samuel Blackwood, who had been lingering near the front of the store, went pale. He shot a panicked look at Hannah, then began backing towards the door. This is terrible news," he stammered. "I must go and tell Martha." He practically fled, leaving Hannah alone to face the storm. Caleb closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He stopped in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. He was a mountain of a man, weathered and hard, and he looked at her not with pity, but with a fierce, assessing intensity. "You're his intended," he stated. It wasn't a question. Hannah found her voice. "That's what I was told." Her quiet, steady response seemed to surprise him. The fury in his eyes banked slightly, replaced by a flicker of curiosity. "The Blackwoods brought you here?" "Yes, they said Mr. Montgomery was delayed on business." Caleb let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Business. He was busy cutting corners on support timbers. That's his business. I warned him. I told him those shafts were unstable." He ran a hand through his dark hair, streaked with silver at the temples. "I was a partner in that mine, a silent one. I put up the capital for the equipment. Montgomery was supposed to handle the operations." He looked at her again. "He told me he needed the money for the mine, but he was bringing you here." The pieces clicked into place. Ezra wasn't just a con man. He was desperate. He'd been running a long con on mail-order brides, taking their savings with the Blackwood's help. But it wasn't enough. He needed a bigger score, so he got into the mining business with Caleb, likely using forged credentials and false promises. When the pressure mounted and the mine started failing, he tried to run one last con on Hannah, hoping her dowry would be enough to let him escape before it all came crashing down. He didn't know, Hannah said, the realization dawning on her. He sent me a coded message. He warned me about the Blackwoods. Caleb's eyes narrowed. What did it say? Danger. Blackwood's not friends. They will take your money. For the first time, Caleb's hard expression wavered. He looked past her, towards the door where Samuel Blackwood had disappeared. So that's their game, he growled. They're not just his partners. They're his handlers. Vultures. He looked back at Hannah. They know you have money? They assume I do. And do you? It was a blunt question, but she felt no threat from him. This man was all sharp edges and rough surfaces, but his anger wasn't directed at her. It was directed at the injustice of it all. Yeah, she said. It's hidden. Good, he grunted. He glanced around the store at the gawking faces. You can't stay here. The Blackwoods, now that Ezra's caught, they're loose ends. They'll be desperate. They won't just let you walk away. He was right. Her life wasn't worth a plug nickel to them now. Her disappearance would be just one more mystery in a town full of secrets. What do you suggest? She asked. The question seemed to hang in the air. Here she was, a stranger, implicitly placing her trust in another stranger. But instinct told her Caleb Thornton was a man who lived by a code. A harsh one, perhaps, but an honest one. My ranch, he said after a moment's thought. It's 20 miles from here, isolated, safe. They won't follow you there. He paused, his expression unreadable. I need a housekeeper. The place is a mess. I'll pay you. Room and board plus wages. It's a business arrangement. Nothing more. It was a lifeline, a way out. But it was also a leap of faith into another unknown. From a house of smiling liars to the isolated ranch of a man who radiated anger like a furnace. Patrick Donovan, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. He's right, miss, he said in a low voice. Caleb Thornton is a hard man, but he's a fair one. You'll be safer with him than you are in Pine Creek. That settled it. I accept, Hannah said. Get your things, Caleb commanded. Only what you can carry. We leave in 5 minutes. It was a whirlwind. Hannah rushed back to the Blackwood house, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. She moved with a purpose she hadn't felt in her entire life. She slipped into the house through the back door, praying Martha was distracted. She could hear her upstairs, banging drawers, likely searching the guest room. Hannah didn't go to her room. She went straight to the small parlor, to the bookshelf in the corner. Ezra's coded message had given her an idea. The Blackwoods were clearly literate, but their books were all for show. Thick, leather-bound volumes of history and philosophy that looked like they'd never been opened. She pulled one out. Tucked inside was a ledger. Her fingers flew as she flipped through the pages. It was all there. Names: Eleanor Vance, Mary Ann Parker, Abigail Smith, and next to each name, a monetary amount and a date. It was a record of their victims. The final entry was her own name, Hannah Wilson. Next to it was the amount they expected to get from her, and a date, tomorrow's date. They were planning to move on her tomorrow. She tore the pages from the ledger and stuffed them inside her dress. Then she crept upstairs. She could hear Martha in the guest room, muttering in frustration. Hannah slipped into the master bedroom. It was her only chance to retrieve her money. But the floorboard under her bed was too risky with Martha next door. Wait. The money wasn't under her bed. She had hidden it under the bed in the guest room. She had been sleeping in the master bedroom since her arrival. They had put her in the master suite, the nicest room, a fat pig for the slaughter. She had hidden the money in the other room. The one they assumed was empty. With a surge of adrenaline, she raced into the small guest room she'd first been shown, the one she had inspected and rejected. She lifted the rug, pried up the loose floorboard, and there it was, her leather pouch. Safe. She grabbed it and ran, not even bothering to gather her other belongings. Her books, her clothes, they were things. They could be replaced. Her life could not. She met Caleb at the edge of town, where he waited with a wagon and two powerful-looking horses. She scrambled onto the seat beside him, clutching the pouch and the ledger pages. "Ready?" he asked, his blue eyes searching her face. She just nodded, unable to speak. He snapped the reins, and the wagon lurched forward, away from Pine Creek, away from the trap that had almost closed on her. As they rode, she risked a glance back. She saw Martha Blackwood standing on the porch of her house, her face a mask of fury as she realized her prize had slipped away. But they weren't safe yet. 20 miles of open country lay between them and the sanctuary of Caleb's ranch. And desperate people do desperate things. The ride to Thornton Ranch was a tense, silent journey. The vast open landscape, which should have felt liberating, felt menacing. Every grove of trees, every rocky outcropping could be an ambush point. Caleb drove the horses hard, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, a rifle resting across his lap. Hannah clutched her pouch, her knuckles white. She was no longer a shy librarian. She was a survivor, a witness, and she was carrying the evidence that could bring the whole corrupt town down. Caleb didn't speak until they were deep into the rolling hills, the trail growing rougher and more remote. "What you found in the house," he said, not taking his eyes off the path ahead. "What was it?" "A ledger," she said, her voice tight. "Names. The women they robbed. My name was the last one." He cursed under his breath, a low, vicious sound. "How many?" "4 others. Before me." "And Eleanor Vance?" he asked. "The name from the deed?" "She was the first," Hannah said. A chilling thought occurred to her. The deed was for a piece of land north of town, an isolated cabin. Caleb's jaw tightened. "I know the place. Old Trapper's Cabin. Has a deep, dry well." His meaning was clear. A perfect place to hide a body, or 4. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of what they both understood. This was bigger than theft. This was murder. And the Blackwoods would not let the only witness in the evidence simply ride away. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the valley, they saw it, a plume of dust in the distance, behind them, and it was moving fast. "Riders," Caleb said, his voice grim. "2 of them. They're gaining." Hannah's heart leaped into her throat. It had to be the Blackwoods, or men they had hired. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The trail was narrow, flanked by steep, rocky hillsides. "Can we outrun them?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Not in this wagon," Caleb said. He pulled the horses to a stop. "There's a narrow pass up ahead, a choke point. We'll make our stand there." His movements were economical and precise. He checked his rifle, then handed her a pistol from a saddlebag. "Do you know how to use this?" She had never held a gun in her life. She shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "Point it at what you want to hit and pull the trigger," he said simply. "Don't fire until they're close, and don't miss." He looked at her, his expression intense. "I can hold them off, but I need you to do something for me. Take these." He pushed the reins into her hands. "If it goes bad, if I go down, you ride. You ride for the ranch and don't look back. There's a woman there. Her name is Sarah. Give her the ledger. Tell her Caleb sent you. She'll know what to do." The thought of leaving him was unbearable, but she saw the iron resolve in his eyes. This wasn't a discussion. It was an order. The riders were closer now, just 2 dark figures against the blood-red sunset. Caleb jumped down from the wagon, using it as cover, and rested his rifle on the edge of the wagon bed. He was calm, his breathing steady. A man who had faced death before. Hannah watched, her hands shaking as she gripped the heavy pistol. This couldn't be happening. She was a librarian. She organized books. She didn't belong in a gunfight in the middle of the Montana wilderness. The first shot cracked through the evening air. It wasn't from Caleb. It was from the riders. A puff of dust exploded from the ground just feet from the wagon. They were shooting to kill. Caleb returned fire. A single booming shot that echoed through the hills. One of the riders cried out and fell from his horse. One down. The other rider spurred his horse forward, firing wildly. Caleb fired again, but the rider was moving too fast, weaving and ducking. He was closing the distance. In seconds, he would be upon them. "Get ready!" Caleb yelled at her. Hannah raised the pistol with both hands, trying to steady her aim. The rider was a blur of motion, his face contorted in a snarl. It was Samuel Blackwood. His kind, grandfatherly mask was gone, replaced by the face of a killer. He raised his own pistol, aiming it right at Caleb. There was no time to think. Hannah squeezed the trigger. The gun bucked in her hands, the explosion deafening. Samuel Blackwood jerked in the saddle as if struck by an invisible fist. His gun went off, the bullet flying harmlessly into the sky. He stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief, before slumping forward and tumbling from his horse into the dust. Silence. The only sound was the frantic panting of the horses and the ringing in Hannah's ears. She had done it. She had shot a man. She had killed him. The pistol fell from her nerveless fingers. Caleb scrambled over to her. He checked Samuel's body, then the other riders. "They're dead," he said, his voice flat. He looked at Hannah, who was staring at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. He put a hand on her shoulder. It was surprisingly gentle. "You saved my life." She just shook her head, unable to process what had happened. "We have to go," he said, his voice urgent. "Martha will know they failed. She might send others, or she might just run. We have to get to the ranch." He helped her back onto the wagon seat, his presence a solid, reassuring weight beside her. He took the reins and they rode on into the gathering darkness, leaving the bodies behind for the coyotes. They arrived at Thornton Ranch hours later, under a sky littered with stars. The ranch was more of a fortress than a homestead. A sturdy two-story log house stood at the center of a compound, surrounded by a barn, outbuildings, and a high fence. It was a place built for survival. As they pulled into the yard, a light appeared in an upstairs window. The front door opened, and a woman stepped out onto the porch, holding a lantern. She was slender and pale, with the same startling blue eyes as Caleb, but hers were filled with a haunted, anxious light. She held a shotgun in her hands, and she held it with an unnerving familiarity. "Caleb?" she called, her voice thin and reedy. "It's me, Sarah," he called back. "I'm all right. I brought someone." He helped a still-shaken Hannah down from the wagon. He led her onto the porch into the warm lantern light. The woman, Sarah, looked from Caleb to Hannah, her eyes taking in Hannah's disheveled appearance, the shock on her face. Her gaze was sharp, intelligent, and filled with a deep, weary sadness. "What happened?" Sarah asked. "Trouble in Pine Creek," Caleb said grimly. He looked at Hannah. "This is my sister, Sarah. Sarah, this is Hannah Wilson. She'll be staying with us." Sarah's eyes fixed on Hannah. There was no welcome in them, only suspicion. "Another one?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Caleb, you promised. Not another one." Hannah stared at her, confused. "Another one?" Caleb put a protective arm around Hannah's shoulders. "It's not like that, Sarah," he said, his voice soft but firm. "She's not one of them. She's one of us." He looked down at Hannah. "Welcome to Thornton Ranch," he said. "You're safe now." But as Hannah looked at the haunted woman with the shotgun and the shadows that clung to the corners of the isolated ranch house, she had a sinking feeling that she had just traded one kind of trap for another. The inside of the ranch house was a stark contrast to Caleb's rugged exterior. It was clean, orderly, and surprisingly comfortable, with a massive stone fireplace, sturdy handmade furniture, and shelves overflowing with books. But the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Sarah moved like a ghost, her feet silent on the wooden floors. She prepared a simple meal of bread and stew without a word, her eyes constantly flitting towards Hannah with a mixture of fear and resentment. "Another one? You promised." Her words echoed in Hannah's mind. What did she mean? After they ate, Caleb led Hannah to a small, neat room upstairs. "This will be yours," he said. "It's not much, but the door has a lock." He said it matter-of-factly, but the implication was clear. She might need it. "Your sister," Hannah began, hesitant. "She seems unwell." Caleb's face hardened. "Sarah's been through a lot. She has reason to be cautious of strangers, especially women who show up unexpectedly." He sighed, the sound heavy with old pain. Just give her time. But time was something Hannah felt she didn't have. She had the ledger pages and the deed hidden in her dress. Evidence. She had to get them to the territorial marshal. But how? They were miles from any real authority, and Caleb seemed in no hurry to leave the sanctuary of his ranch. The next few days passed in a strange, suspended reality. Hannah tried to make herself useful, cleaning, cooking, tending to the small garden. She was trying to earn her keep, to prove she wasn't a threat. Sarah watched her every move, her silence a heavy, judging weight. One afternoon, Hannah found Sarah in the library, a small room lined with books on agriculture, history, and engineering. Sarah was holding a small, leather-bound photo album. As Hannah entered, she snapped it shut, but not before Hannah caught a glimpse of a photograph. A woman with a bright, happy smile, standing next to a younger, clean-shaven Caleb. "Who was she?" Hannah asked softly. Sarah flinched, clutching the album to her chest. "She was my friend," she whispered. "Her name was Elizabeth. She was the first one Ezra brought here." The blood drained from Hannah's face. "Brought here? To the ranch?" A tear traced a path down Sarah's pale cheek. "Caleb and Ezra were partners once. A long time ago. They bought this land together. They were going to build a life. Caleb brought me and Ezra. He sent for a bride, Elizabeth. The story came out in broken, painful fragments. Ezra hadn't always been a monster. He and Caleb had been friends. But the frontier was hard. Their first winter was brutal, and they lost nearly everything. Ezra changed. He grew bitter, greedy. He saw Elizabeth's dowry not as a foundation for their future, but as a solution to his own problems. "He told her he was investing it for them," Sarah whispered, "but he just took it, and when it was gone, he grew tired of her. He met the Blackwoods. They filled his head with ideas, easier ways to get money." "What happened to Elizabeth?" Hannah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Ezra told Caleb she ran off with a traveling salesman. Caleb was heartbroken. He searched for her for months, but he never found her." Sarah's eyes, so like her brother's, held a chilling certainty. "I don't think she ever left the valley." This changed everything. Caleb wasn't just a stranger who had helped her. He was a victim, just like her. He had been betrayed by his friend, and the woman he loved had been stolen from him. His fight against Ezra wasn't just about business. It was personal, deeply personal. And his ranch wasn't just a sanctuary. It was a prison of his own grief. That night, Hannah couldn't sleep. The story of Elizabeth haunted her. She thought about the deed she carried, the one signed by Eleanor Vance, and the ledger, with its list of names. How many women had vanished into Ezra's web? She needed to talk to Caleb. She found him in the barn, mending a harness by lantern light. He worked with a focused intensity, his powerful hands surprisingly deft. She held out the ledger pages. "You need to see this." He took them, his brow furrowing, as he read the names, the amounts, the dates. When he got to the last page, the one with her name on it, his hand clenched, crumpling the paper. "This is what he became," he said, his voice thick with a mixture of rage and sorrow. "A ghoul, picking over the hopes of lonely women." "The first name," Hannah said gently. "Eleanor Vance. I have the deed to her land. She signed it over to him for $1. Caleb looked up, his eyes blazing. "Let me see it." She handed him the folded paper. He stared at it, his face a grim mask. "This land, it adjoins my property. It's the old trapper's cabin with the well." He looked at her, and she saw the terrible truth dawning in his eyes, a truth he had perhaps long suspected, but never allowed himself to face. "Elizabeth," he breathed. "He told me she left. But what if he brought her there? What if they're all there?" The horror of it settled over them. Ezra and the Blackwoods weren't just thieves. They were serial killers, using the vast, empty wilderness as their personal graveyard. "We have to go to the marshal," Hannah said, her voice firm. "Now, with this ledger, this deed, they have to listen." "The nearest marshal is in Helena," Caleb said. "That's a 2-day ride, and we can't be sure who in Pine Creek might be on the Blackwoods payroll. The sheriff is useless. We'd be riding into an ambush." He began to pace the length of the barn. Martha Blackwood knows where you are. She knows you got away. She won't just sit and wait. She'll have cut her losses and run, or she'll be coming to finish the job. Just then, a sound cut through the night, the frantic barking of the ranch dogs, followed by a single sharp yelp as one of them was silenced. Caleb froze. He grabbed his rifle from its hook on the wall. "They're here," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Get back to the house. Bar the door. Tell Sarah." Hannah ran, her feet flying across the cold, hard-packed dirt of the yard. She burst into the house. "They're here!" Sarah didn't panic. Her haunted eyes became sharp and focused. She moved with a chilling efficiency, grabbing the shotgun from beside the door and a box of shells from the mantelpiece. "The windows," she said. "We have to shutter the windows." Together they worked, their movements synchronized by adrenaline. They slammed the heavy wooden shutters into place, plunging the house into darkness, lit only by a single lantern. From outside came the sound of splintering wood as the main gate to the compound was smashed open. Then a voice called out, dripping with false sweetness. "Hannah, dear, we know you're in there. Samuel and I were so worried about you." It was Martha Blackwood. "That terrible Mr. Thornton kidnapped you. Just come on out, and we'll take you somewhere safe." "She's playing games," Sarah whispered, loading the shotgun with a steady hand. "Trying to draw us out." "How many?" Hannah asked. "I saw at least 4 sets of headlights from the ridge," Sarah replied. "It's not just her. She brought help." Caleb's voice came from the darkness outside the back door. "Hannah, let me in!" She fumbled with the bar and pulled the door open. He slipped inside, his face grim. "They've surrounded the house," he said. "It's Martha and at least 3 hired guns." He looked at his sister, who stood ready with the shotgun. "You remember the plan?" Sarah nodded, her face pale but determined. "The tunnel." Hannah looked between them. "Tunnel?" "Our father was a paranoid man," Caleb said with a grim smile. "He believed in being prepared. There's a root cellar and a way out." He turned to Hannah. "But we're not running. Not this time. They came here to bury their secrets. We're going to make sure they get buried with them." He looked at the ledger pages and the deed clutched in Hannah's hand. "This ends tonight, one way or another." The siege began. The quiet ranch house became a battlefield. Gunshots echoed in the night, shattering the peace of the valley. Martha Blackwood and her men were determined, firing at the shuttered windows, trying to find a weakness. Inside, the 3 of them were an unlikely team of defenders. Caleb, a seasoned frontiersman, moved from window to window, returning fire with deadly accuracy. Sarah, the fragile ghost, was transformed. She knew the layout of the house better than anyone, calling out enemy positions, reloading weapons with a practiced calm that was terrifying to behold. And Hannah, the librarian, discovered a strength she never knew she possessed. She wasn't a fighter, but she was an organizer. She kept ammunition ready, tended to a superficial wound Caleb took on his arm, and most importantly, she kept watch. Her quiet nature, her habit of observing every detail, made her the perfect lookout. From a small peephole in an upstairs bedroom, she could see the entire yard. She watched the hired guns move, noted their patterns, and relayed the information to Caleb in a calm, steady voice. "One man moving towards the barn," she'd whisper. A moment later, a shot from Caleb's rifle would ring out, followed by a scream. "Another one is trying the back fence." A blast from Sarah's shotgun would send him scrambling for cover. They were holding them off, but they were trapped. Their ammunition wouldn't last forever. "They're trying to set the barn on fire," Hannah reported, her voice tight with alarm as she saw a flicker of orange near the barn door. "Let them," Caleb said grimly from his position downstairs. "It's just a building. It's the house we have to protect." He looked over at Sarah. "Is it time?" Sarah nodded. "It's time." Caleb turned to Hannah. "The tunnel I told you about. It leads from the root cellar out to the creek bed, 100 yards from the house. Sarah's going to take the evidence, the ledger, the deed, and she is going to go for help." "No," Hannah said immediately. "I should go. She needs to stay here with you." Sarah stepped forward, her blue eyes burning with an intensity Hannah had never seen. "I have spent 5 years hiding in this house," she said, her voice shaking but strong. 5 years as a victim. I will not hide anymore. Elizabeth was my friend. This is for her." She looked at her brother. You keep them busy. I'll be back by dawn. It was a desperate plan, but it was their only one. Caleb laid down a volley of covering fire, forcing the attackers to duck, while Sarah slipped down into the darkness of the root cellar. Now it was just the two of them, Caleb and Hannah alone against the remaining attackers. The fire in the barn was growing, casting a hellish dancing light across the yard. Martha's getting desperate, Caleb said, reloading his rifle. She knows her time is running out. As if on cue, Martha's voice shrieked across the yard. Thornton, I know your secret. I know all about your crazy sister. Send out the librarian, and we'll let you live with your shame. What is she talking about? Hannah asked. Caleb's face was a mask of stone. She's bluffing. But Hannah saw the flicker of pain in his eyes. There was another secret here, something more than just Elizabeth's death. The attack intensified. Bullets tore through the log walls. A lantern in the main room was hit and shattered, plunging them into near darkness, save for the firelight from outside. Suddenly, from the root cellar door, came a frantic banging. Caleb, let me in! It was Sarah's voice, high with panic. Caleb's face went white. She shouldn't be back! He rushed to the door and threw it open. Sarah stumbled in, her face streaked with dirt, her eyes wide with terror. The tunnel! It's collapsed! A cave-in about 20 feet in. I couldn't get through. Hope died. They were trapped, truly trapped. Martha Blackwood must have heard Sarah's return, because a triumphant, chilling laugh echoed across the yard. Nowhere left to run, Thornton. It's over. Caleb looked at Sarah, then at Hannah. The grim determination on his face was replaced by a look of utter despair. They were out of options, out of time. But Hannah was looking at Sarah. She was looking at the dirt on her face, the way she refused to meet her brother's eyes. And Hannah, the woman who noticed everything, saw that Sarah's hands were clean, perfectly clean, not the hands of someone who had just been scrabbling in a collapsed, dusty tunnel. It was a lie. The tunnel wasn't collapsed. Sarah had never even gone inside. She had hidden somewhere, waited, and come back. But why? Why would she betray them? Then Hannah remembered Sarah's words. Another one? Caleb, you promised, not another one. It wasn't about Ezra's victims. It was about Caleb's. The truth, when it hit, was more devastating than any bullet. Caleb hadn't rescued Sarah from Ezra. He had imprisoned her. The story of Ezra and Elizabeth, it was all a lie, a carefully constructed fiction to gain Hannah's trust. Caleb wasn't a victim. He was a monster, just like the others. He and Sarah worked together. They lured women here, women who were running from men like Ezra. They offered them sanctuary, a safe haven. And then, when their guard was down, they took everything and made them disappear. Elizabeth, Eleanor, all the others. They hadn't died at Ezra's hands. They had died right here. Sarah was his bait, his accomplice, and her trauma was the perfect act to keep anyone from ever suspecting the truth. Hannah stared at Caleb, at this man she had trusted, fought alongside. She saw the truth in his eyes now, a cold, predatory light. He had seen the ledger, the deed. He knew she was a witness, not just to the Blackwoods' crimes, but to his. He could never let her leave. His offer of a job, his rescue, it was all just a more patient, more elaborate version of the same trap. What do we do now? Caleb asked, turning to her, his face a perfect mask of concern. Hannah's mind raced, faster than it ever had in her life. She was trapped in a house with two killers, with a gang of other killers outside. There was no way out. Unless... The fire, she said, her voice a hoarse whisper. It's our only chance. We have to set the house on fire. Caleb stared at her. What? That's insane. We'll be burned alive. No, she said, her eyes wild. It's a distraction. A big one. While they're focused on the flames, we use the tunnel. The real one. She looked pointedly at Sarah, who flinched. Sarah will lead us. We can escape to the creek bed. It was a desperate gamble. A bluff. She had no idea if the tunnel was real, but she saw the flicker of calculation in Caleb's eyes. He was weighing the options. A fire would destroy the house and any evidence of his past crimes that might be hidden within it. It would be a clean slate, and in the chaos, getting rid of one small librarian would be easy. All right, he said slowly. We do it. He turned to Sarah. Get the kerosene from the kitchen. Sarah hesitated, looking from her brother to Hannah, her face a mess of confusion and fear. She was the weak link. Go on, Sarah, Hannah urged, her voice gentle but firm. It's the only way. As Sarah scurried to the kitchen, Caleb looked at Hannah with something like admiration. You're a survivor, I'll give you that. I learned from the best, she replied, her voice dripping with an irony that was lost on him. They worked quickly, splashing kerosene on the dry wooden walls of the main room. Outside, Martha and her men, seeing the activity through the cracks in the shutters, began to fire more furiously. They knew something was happening. Ready? Caleb asked, holding a lit match. Hannah took a deep breath. This was it. She nodded. He threw the match. The room erupted in a whoosh of flame. The heat was instantaneous, ferocious. The cellar! Caleb yelled over the roar. He grabbed Hannah's arm, pulling her toward the cellar door. Sarah was already there, her face illuminated by the growing inferno. Caleb shoved them both towards the opening. Go! I'll be right behind you! Sarah scrambled down the ladder into the darkness. Hannah followed, her lungs burning. She risked one last look back. Caleb was silhouetted against the flames, a dark, demonic figure. He wasn't following. He was standing there watching the fire, a strange, triumphant smile on his face. He was letting the fire do his dirty work. But Hannah had one last card to play, the pistol Caleb had given her. It was still tucked into the waistband of her dress. She pulled it out just as a flaming beam crashed down from the ceiling, separating her from Caleb, trapping him in the inferno. Through the curtain of fire, their eyes met. She saw the shock and betrayal on his face as she raised the gun. She didn't hesitate. She pointed it at what she wanted to hit and pulled the trigger. Then she turned and plunged into the darkness of the cellar, slamming the heavy door shut behind her, sealing the monster in his tomb. The cellar was pitch black and filled with the smell of damp earth. Hannah fumbled for Sarah, grabbing her arm. The tunnel, she hissed. Where is it? Sarah was sobbing, a broken, terrified sound. There is no tunnel. It was a lie. We're trapped. We're going to die. The roar of the fire above them was growing louder. The cellar door was already starting to smoke. Listen to me, Hannah yelled, shaking the hysterical woman. Your brother is dead. Martha Blackwood is outside. Your game is over. Your only chance of survival is me. Now tell me the truth. Is there a way out? Through her sobs, Sarah finally choked out the words. The well, in the corner. It's a dry well. There's a loose stone. It leads to an old mining shaft. It was real. The escape route was real. They scrambled through the darkness, their hands searching the cold stone walls of the cellar. They found the old well shaft, and after a frantic search, a loose stone. Pulling it free revealed a narrow black opening. Go, Hannah commanded, pushing Sarah towards it. The shaft was tight and suffocating. They crawled on their hands and knees over sharp rocks, the sound of the fire fading behind them. After what felt like an eternity, they saw a faint glimmer of light. Starlight. They emerged from the side of a hill covered in dirt and gasping for air, 100 yards from the burning ranch house. The entire yard was illuminated by the blaze. Martha Blackwood and her 2 remaining men were staring at the inferno, laughing, convinced their problems were being incinerated. They hadn't seen them escape. Hannah and Sarah huddled in the shadows of the rocks, watching. They saw Martha gesture for her men to move in, to sift through the ashes for whatever valuables might have survived. As the men approached the smoldering ruins, a new sound cut through the night, the sound of dozens of galloping horses. Sarah's plan hadn't been a betrayal. It had been a desperate, brilliant act of redemption. She hadn't gone back to the house because the tunnel was collapsed. She had gone back to signal for help. The frantic banging on the cellar door wasn't for Caleb. It was for Hannah. A warning. And then she had slipped out a back window, circled around the attackers in the darkness, and ridden like the devil was on her heels. Now a posse of ranchers from the next valley over, alerted by Sarah's desperate ride, descended on the scene, their rifles ready. Martha and her men were caught completely by surprise. They were surrounded, outgunned, with nowhere to run. The fight was short and brutal. When the dust settled, the reign of terror in Pine Creek was over. In the weeks that followed, the full, horrific truth came to light. The ledger and the deed led the territorial marshals to the old trapper's cabin. In the dry well, they found the remains of 4 women: Eleanor, Mary Ann, Abigail, and Elizabeth. Sarah, granted immunity for her testimony, told them everything. About her brother's descent into madness, about her years of living in fear, a prisoner in her own home, forced to be an accomplice to his horrible crimes. She confessed how she had tried subtly to warn the women away, but Caleb's charm and her own feigned weakness were a powerful combination. Hannah had been the first one strong enough, smart enough to see through the lies, the first one who gave Sarah the courage to fight back. Pine Creek was purged. Martha Blackwood was hanged. The corrupt sheriff was arrested. The town, free from the darkness that had poisoned it for so long, began to heal. Hannah Wilson, the quiet librarian, became something of a legend. She used her own savings along with the recovered money from Caleb's hidden stash to set up a trust for women arriving in the territory alone, a safe haven to protect them from predators like the ones she had faced. She never went back to Connecticut. She had found her voice in the heart of the wilderness, a voice that was quiet, but steady and strong. She stayed in Montana, helping Sarah rebuild her life, and together they built a new community, one founded not on lies and greed, but on resilience, courage, and the simple, powerful truth that even the softest voices can roar like a fire when fighting for what is right. And that, my friends, is a story worth telling. If you enjoyed this wild ride, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because I've got a whole library of stories just like this one waiting for you. And don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Let me know in the comments what you thought of that final twist. Did you see it coming? Until next time, stay safe and always, always question the story you're being told.